I'm afraid we have to talk about the NHS again.
Do we have to?
Yeah, I'm
really?
afraid so. While we greatly admire the diligence of overworked doctors and nurses, the health system itself is like a patient on life support, getting worse with each passing week. Unlike a patient on life support, however, the NHS is actually supposed to look after the health and well-being of millions of people with medical ailments, diseases and disabilities whose severity ranges from teething to terminal. And yet the bad headlines, the never events, just keep rolling in. So if we take a look at this, the NHS faces an Easter, quote, as bad as any winter. So as some of you may know, in winter you have the seasonal flu season, and it's also cold and so on and so forth. And so you generally get more people coming to hospital or seeking aid from doctors and nurses and so on. It's generally less hospitable in the winter. And so you expect that each year is going to be cyclical for hospitals. You get more patients in the winter and fewer in the summer, for example. Mm-hmm. Well, no, we're going to get a bad Easter as well. Now, why is that, do you think?
Because it's a socialist system and socialist systems don't work?
Apart from that ideological but probably sadly correct comment. Why is our Easter going to be bad? I think it's because we've got a record backlog. Because waiting times are ridiculous.
Of course. Yeah.
And it's getting to the point now where people who've delayed their medical treatment for 2 years will no longer delay it. Also because of Ukraine pushing COVID off the top headline of the news, people are now not fearing COVID so much, so they feel safer about going into hospitals and so on and so forth. But I'll just read from this article slightly. NHS leaders are warning that the health service is facing the brutal reality of an Easter as bad as most winters. Latest data shows record waits for planned surgery and in A&E as staff plough through a backlog fueled by COVID. The government says there is hope on the horizon. Sadly, my telescope isn't that strong. Retired seamstress Jean Shepherd had a stroke in April last year, leaving her severely disabled and requiring round-the-clock care. At the end of February, there was an outbreak of sickness at her nursing home, and she needed hospital treatment. It's funny how there's always these outbreaks of disease at nursing homes, isn't it? It's almost like they're an inhumane system that is just a sad commentary on our inability as modern people to look after our aged. Anyway,
I've got to agree with that.
We just seem to farm them off to these nursing homes, visit once a week or so. And
to be fair, full-time care, you do need someone present.
Absolutely. It is difficult to look after old people. And not, but it's also true that this is something that we as a society did quite well back in the day. And now we have this system which is not really a solution. It's kind of an out of sight, out of mind idea.
No, I do agree.
She had to wait in a wheelchair for more than 9 hours until an ambulance arrived to take her to A&E. The 87-year-old from Nottingham then spent the next 31 hours on a trolley between the emergency department and a secondary care unit.
That is ridiculous.
That's like over a day.
Well, I don't understand how an 87-year-old can be just left unattended like that.
On a trolley. Well, whether she was attended to or not, I don't know, but she didn't have a proper bed to go to. She was very distressed because she doesn't like hospitals at the best of times, says her son, Andy Shepherd, and I bet she loves them now. Since the stroke, because of her cognitive ability, she doesn't understand what's happening around her. So imagine that. Imagine being in that state of mind, and then for 31 hours you're just sort of parked on this bed somewhere. Mrs. Shepherd was eventually moved to a bed in a main hospital ward where her family says she later contracted COVID. Nosocomial infections, one of the main vectors of transmission, apparently. But there we go.
This is farcical. This is like some sort of like satirical joke, but it's
not. It's someone's life.
It's the health service that we have to tolerate in this country, that we're supposedly shelling in billions and billions, if not trillions,
about 180 billion a year, roughly, and getting higher every year. The government gets criticised for not funding the NHS, not because it's not increasing money to the NHS, but because it's not increasing the amount of money given to the NHS fast enough, which is mad. Which, anyway, mainstream media narratives managed to somehow twist into the government cutting spending.
I don't really understand that.
It basically
blatant lies, isn't it?
You can spin it that, this particular service in this particular hospital got cut amid all of the restructurings and reorganisations while these huge tranches of billions of dollars are going in each year. So that's a cut.
Yes. The funny thing is that the graph of NHS spending is like rocketing up, whilst the like quality of service is really not reflecting the amount of money we're pouring into it, which is of course down to the system, that
Yeah.
the fact it's a socialist system.
I feel with the NHS, people in Britain love the NHS until they actually have to use it for anything remotely serious, and then they're horrified and shocked by what they see, because they're brought up with this almost mythical narrative of how brilliant it is from our leftist media, and then they encounter it and it's like, yeah, it's not good at all. Her son says, I appreciate that A&E departments have always been busy, but I just wasn't prepared for what greeted me at the hospital. There were patients on ambulance trolleys literally everywhere, and the staff were absolutely rushed off their feet. I remember thinking at the time that this is not sustainable.
Privatise the lot, I say.
And there are many examples of this. I'm going to show one more. In Northern Ireland, this one. Northern Ireland health crisis. Elderly woman died after 6-hour ambulance wait. So Northern Ireland is that funny bit of land which spineless conservative leaders cut off from Britain to be sort of neither in the UK nor in the EU, but having to follow the rules of both, because otherwise we would apparently break the Good Friday Agreement and cause terrorism and sectarian violence or something like that, or we would undermine the EU's internal trade bloc or something like that. Yeah, anyway. So I read from this article. An 89-year-old woman died at her home after a near 6-hour wait for an ambulance, during which paramedics were twice dispatched to her but were diverted to other calls, her family has told BBC News.
That's appalling.
Kathleen Neagle died on 8th of July 2021 in Dundonald after being ill for a number of days. Her family said her GP called for an ambulance at about 4 o'clock BST that day, but none arrived until before 10 o'clock in the evening. Ambulances dispatched to treat Mrs. Neagle were twice diverted to Category 1 emergency calls. The initial call for an ambulance was considered a Category 3 call and was upgraded to a Category 2 later that evening. Both are treated less urgently than Category 1. The Northern Ireland Ambulance Service said it deeply regretted any delay in ambulance response. Miss Neagle's daughter Meta Patterson said she was disgusted at how the system had failed her mother. And they put failed in quotation marks here. Presumably that's because she used the word failed and not because the BBC was saying, oh, failed, as if waiting 6 hours for an ambulance till you die is the system failing.
Well, it is the BBC. They are deeply subversive, considering that they're a publicly funded... because they're a publicly funded institution.
Miss Patterson said that on 6th of July, 2 days before she died, her mother initially fell ill and attended the Ulster Hospital by ambulance. She was diagnosed with vomiting and diarrhoea and was discharged. However, she deteriorated, and on the afternoon of 8th of July, her family contacted the doctor, who then requested an ambulance. So this isn't them, knee-jerk, oh, she's got a sniffle, let's ring an ambulance. No, this is, oh, this looks bad, let's ring the doctor. They ring the doctor calls an ambulance. So, the doctor, a medical professional, obviously has a reason to do that.
Of course.
They carry on. When the young ambulance driver eventually came in at 10 p.m, she was dead. He didn't even realise what he was coming to. It sounds terrible. I know people would say she was 89, but she was a fit 89-year-old. She didn't have ongoing problems that would cause that. And apparently she died of heart failure. It's a tragic story, but this is basically par for the course. These are not isolated incidents. This happens all over the country. And by the sound of it, it's not... It doesn't sound like it's sheer incompetence on the part of the health service and the hospitals, though it might be, but they don't seem to have the resources in the front line to tackle what they're doing.
Well, I don't doubt that the people who actually do the job are working really hard. It's more so that the way the system is structured is completely, as the person said in one of the stories, unsustainable.
Yeah.
It just doesn't... It can't meet the needs of the people using the service.
Yeah, and you can have more ambulances and fewer managers, right? And things like this.
Yeah, we're a developed country that is struggling to be able to treat people. And this didn't happen in the past nearly as much, and it certainly doesn't happen in other countries where they have privatized healthcare systems. You told me a story once of walking into a doctor's surgery in Japan, and you actually got to see the doctor just by walking in, which
I was shocked at. I hadn't even registered at the doctor.
I think I've tried to get a doctor's surgery appointment, and it would have taken about 4 months to be able to get one. So I was just like, yeah, forget it. Yeah, it's not that bad.
I saw a tweet by actually a BBC reporter of all people saying that after 45 calls to his doctor, he's finally got an appointment to speak to a dental receptionist. Something stupid like that. It's a bit weird, but yeah. So just to make the point, hammer that point home that this isn't an isolated incident, let's look at a couple more. Pensioner 94 dies in driveway of Scott's home after waiting 4 hours for ambulance crew. And this guy will have paid into the system, presumably, for his whole life. You know, he'll have worked, paid his taxes, and now he's a pensioner, 94, is when the government and the health service that he paid into is supposed to look after him. No, dies in his driveway after 4 hours waiting. We go to the next one. Glasgow man dies alone in Maryhill tenement, waiting 5 hours for ambulance. There's another one. And if we go to this one, this takes the biscuit. Glasgow dad dies after waiting 40 hours for an ambulance after collapsing at home.
40 hours?
Yeah, this is the most egregious that I've found. He had a fall, and so he had cuts in his back and arms. The fall, called an ambulance, and yeah. His GP, who repeatedly warned call handlers that Mr. Brown's condition was critical, his GP, who was ringing up the helplines, described the situation as third world medicine. And I believe he actually said that if this happens to you, then ignore the ambulances if it's serious and just pile into a car and get them to hospital.
So you basically just have to drive yourself or get one of your family members to get to hospital.
Ask your neighbours, ask anyone if it's that serious, and just do it, because the ambulances are not reliable fundamentally.
It's absurd.
Now, it does vary. When I've had to use an ambulance, it has actually been very timely and has been quite good. So my experiences has been all right, but obviously there is a huge variation. And and just to hammer home the point as well that this cost us an absolute fortune, let's have a look at this. One of my favourite Twitter handles, Days of NHS Spending. Go give them a follow, they're good chaps. Captain Tom raised £33 million in 2020 by walking laps of his garden. You remember Captain Tom,
of course,
don't you? BBC darling. This raised enough money to fund the NHS for 1.6 hours.
Yeah, it puts it into perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, so he spent more time walking around his garden, probably, than the NHS.
A very long time walking around his garden.
Yeah, well, he's an old pensioner. Well, if we go to the next one. The NHS spends the entire yearly Ukrainian military budget once every 10 days.
That's just absurd.
I know. They also spend the entire yearly Russian military budget once every 100 days. And Russia massively overspends on its military, of course.
So we could, in theory, if we got rid of the NHS and put all that money, we could take on both Ukraine and Russia at the same time and be like,
with one hand behind our back. That would be 110 days of NHS spending.
Oh, how do people justify this in the modern day? It's ridiculous.
How do you justify this? I know lots of people like the NHS, but the more I look into it, the more I struggle to see why. If we go to the most farcical of the lot, the next one, an entire permanent base on the moon would cost 54 days of NHS spending to construct. It would cost just 15 days of NHS spending to maintain it every year.
I mean, if you need any more evidence that socialist policies hold back the innovation of mankind, here it is.
Honestly, I think we should do this because the more I look into this kind of stuff, the more I want to hop in a moon rocket and blast off from this failing country.
Yeah, Elon, can you send us to Mars already? I'm sick of this planet.
Yeah. Health Service X. Where's it coming? He can find a punny name for it. Anyway, that's all I have for you on the NHS. And seriously, ask yourselves and your friends the questions, why do we have the NHS still?
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the premium hangouts we do sometimes, this one between Carl and Thomas debating whether or not wokeism is, well, real socialism. And if you want to follow what else Thomas is putting out, you can follow him on Getter at Thomas Dowling on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.